We are one, a diverse group of proudly kindred spirits, together not by coincidence, but because we choose to journey together. We are active and proactive. We care deeply. We live our love as best as we can. We are one, working, eating, laughing, playing, singing, storytelling, sharing, and rejoicing, getting to know each other, taking risks, opening up, questioning, seeking, searching, trying to understand, struggling, making mistakes, paying attention, asking questions, listening, and living our answers, learning to love our neighbors and learning to love ourselves, creating a beloved community together. We are one. Come, let us worship.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Berkeley. I'm Jason, and I'll be your worship associate today. This is a welcoming congregation, and we always are working together on how to better welcome and care for one another. If this is your first time here, we're so glad that you've come and joined us. And whoever you are, we welcome you in the fullness of who you are. As we begin, we want to acknowledge that this church occupies land of the Huichin, the unceded territory of the Chochenyo-speaking Ohlone people. We understand that we continue to benefit from the seizure and occupation of this land. We acknowledge and embrace our responsibility to take restorative action. We affirm that this is deeply felt and commit our congregation to be in right relationship with Indigenous communities, aligning in solidarity, supporting Indigenous projects, and caring properly for the land. So, please take a moment to prepare yourself and your space for our time together. You might get a candle and a way of light to light it so that you can join us in the chalice lighting at home. Now, as Reverend Michelle lights the chalice flame, let's kindle our own flames along with her to these words. We seek our place in the world and the answers to our heart's deep questions. As we seek, may our hearts be open to unexpected answers. May the light of our chalice remind us that this is a community of warmth, of wisdom, and welcoming of multiple truths. We also pause to remind ourselves of some of the foundations of resilience. With Reverend Michelle, we light a candle of courage, a candle of acts of service, a candle of fellowship, and a candle of hope. May we find and cultivate these in ourselves and in one another. Now, please join us in singing our opening song, It Sounds Along the Ages. The words will be on screen. Now, please join with me in saying our covenant. Love guides this church. The quest for truth and justice is its common purpose. To give thanks, listen deeply, speak with care, honor our differences, and seek and grant forgiveness. These things we covenant with one another.
There is a garden in her face where roses and white lilies grow. A heavenly paradise is that place wherein all pleasant fruits do flow. cherries grow which none can buy, till cherry ripe themselves do cry. Those cherries fairly do enclose of orient pearl a double row, which when her lovely laughter shows, they look like rosebuds filled with snow. Yet them no peer nor prince can buy, till cherry ripe themselves do cry. Her eyes like angels watch them still, her brows like bended bows do stand, threatening with piercing frowns to kill all that attempt with eye or hand those sacred cherries to come nigh, till cherry ripe themselves do cry.
My name is Alice, and I'm one of the co-chairs on the family ministry team. This is the time for all ages, and normally we'd welcome the young and the young at heart to come up to the chancel and hear a story. But we're just going to have to imagine. Today, I have a story about a man named Joseph Priestley. Joseph was born before the time of our U.S. Revolution in the 1700s, but in England. And because he was pretty smart, his family thought he should study to be a minister. So we did. But he wasn't just any minister. In that time, it was a pretty important distinction between people who believed in the Church of Christ, the Church of England, and those who didn't, those who were dissenters. Well, Joseph Priestley was a dissenter, but he wasn't just any dissenter. In fact, when Reverend Priestley became a minister, he was even more like a dissenter's dissenter. Even the people who didn't believe in the Church of England didn't agree with what the Reverend Joseph Priestley believed. You see, the Reverend Joseph Priestley was also very interested in the natural sciences. He was always learning about new scientific advances and doing experiments. He even knew Benjamin Franklin. He published a book on electricity based on Benjamin Franklin's and others' experiments that was so popular, it was the textbook for the next 100 or so years. But more than that, he also did chemistry experiments too. And you know what? The Reverend Priestley, who also got like a bunch of PhDs, and so he became a doctor, he discovered oxygen. He's the one that figured out that's the stuff we need to breathe. He was pretty clever and pretty tenacious at his studies. And because he was so clever with science and nature, and he also believed so much in the power of observation and reasoning, he put forward the idea, which was really actually controversial back then, that everything in the universe is made of matter that we can know and see. And if we study this stuff, we can be more compassionate, happy, prosperous. But on the other side, we can't really talk about the soul because it's divine. And so we can't really know it. But he believed that God was good, and because he, God, created both nature and humans and the soul, which was divine, everything would be perfected by God. So here's where the story comes in. So because there were so many people, both the official Church of England and the other people, the dissenters, both of them couldn't agree with the Reverend Dr. Priestley that nature, science, and religion could be combined, and that God could love everyone, and that everyone's soul could be divine. Because they couldn't believe that. And the Reverend Dr. Priestley was not shy about his views. In fact, he preached at many churches, and he wrote lots of newspaper articles, and he supported very loudly. He supported the U.S. Revolution and the French Revolution. Well, finally, after he spoke out so very long, those people got very mad. What do you think mad people would do to someone who spoke out so very loudly? Well, these people, they tried to hurt his friends, especially when they came out of a building after a celebration dinner. And then when that got out of hand, they turned into a mob, and the mob burned down several churches, including Reverend Dr. Priestley's. And then that mob went to his house and burned that down. Luckily, Joseph Priestley had heard this might happen, and he had gone to a different city to wait it out. But he still lost all of his stuff, and he was really sad, and he had to move to a different place. But he still spoke out on his scientific studies, and he still spoke out about God's love. But he did this for a while, and then even the other city in England got too dangerous, and he had to leave England altogether. He traveled to the United States in 1794, so after the Revolution, and kept going with his science and his faith. He even discovered the poisonous gas carbon monoxide. Hopefully, you even have a carbon monoxide alarm in your house. Ask your adult about it. In the end, the Reverend Dr. Joseph Priestley became the first Universalist minister in the United States, and he helped found the Unitarian Church in Philadelphia. What a hard trial to stand up for your truths. Even so, many people today think that science and religion just don't go together. Because of people like the Reverend Dr. Joseph Priestley, we have a place like Unitarian Universalism, where we're encouraged to gather our truths from many sources, including science and several religious traditions. Where do you gather yours? Thanks.
We've now come to the time in our service that we make for our hearts and our spirits, for our cares and our concerns for one another. We lift up and hold the joys, the sorrows, the challenges, the burdens we may each be facing. During our time of silence this morning, I invite you to share any of your joys or sorrows or significant milestones going on in your life in the comments section. I invite us all to hold all of these in the embrace that we as a community can. Please join with me now in the spirit of prayer. O Spirit of compassion, enter our hearts, we pray. Be with us in the hard hours. Help us to be kind this day. O Spirit of unity, help us enter into the pain of our neighbors and those around us. Let us walk where they walk, that we might speak a gentle word along the way. O Spirit of love, enlarge our sympathies towards all troubled folks. Let us be generous of heart that we might forgive and be forgiven. O Spirit of thanksgiving, let us be grateful for hands that serve, for those who give, and for those who receive. O Spirit of life, let us walk together in our weakness, that by treading the path together we may be made strong. O Spirit of the spheres, help us to face the mystery of being. Secure us in the larger patterns we can trust, and bless us this holy day. Amen. And now let us join in singing the musical version of the Metta, filled with loving kindness. The words will be on screen.
In preparation for today's reflection, I sought references to help explain how I endeavor to live my life and why. This started me on a journey of intellectual exploration, which started at the Big Bang and Einstein's theory of relativity and passed through to quantum mechanics. Einstein's model of the cosmos postulates that all moments of eternity were born together with the Big Bang and exist contemporaneously. Time past and time future are just as real and fixed as time present. To illustrate this, I ask you to imagine a vast loaf of bread. Wherever you slice the bread, you are cutting through a now of existence, and every now exists eternally in this loaf. If you were to slice the bread here, you would be cutting through the now of dinosaurs roaming the earth. Further along the loaf, we can slice into the now of the framers signing the Declaration of Independence. And slicing here, we see a middle-aged man speaking to an empty church, to a remote audience, about things he knows really very little about. This is our collective now. Einstein also demonstrated that time does not pass across the universe at a constant rate. It is relative. Furthermore, Einstein showed that this remarkable property of time is magnified by distance. Writers and filmmakers have given us innumerable visions of this phenomenon when space travelers return to Earth having aged hours or weeks, maybe years, while everyone here on Earth has aged by decades or centuries. Einstein also demonstrated that time does not pass across the universe. Let's return to our Wonder Bread and imagine our now as existing towards this end, this side of the loaf of bread. And on the other side of the loaf, which is light years away on the galactic scale, there is another being riding a bicycle away from us. Let's call him Bob. Now, as Bob is riding his bike in a direction away from us, his time is passing ever so much slower than our time. And when that effect is magnified across the vast distance between Bob and us, that time shows that the slicing through Bob's time does not slice through our collective now, but rather slices backwards, so that Bob's now intersects with the signing of the Independence. And if Bob were to start riding towards us, his time would actually intersect with our future, with our great-great-grandchildren sitting down at the table in a city called Elon Muskville, the capital of Mars, complaining, potatoes again? Well, as true as this may be, it's not very useful when contemplating a guiding theology, as it suggests that the future is fixed and there's nothing we can do about it. Enter quantum mechanics and the double slit experiment. Scientists designed an experiment which passed waves of light through two slits, beyond which was a screen registering the impact of the energy was created. By passing through the two slits, two separate waves were created that intersected and interfered with each other. Where the crests of the waves met, the energy was greater, and where the troughs met, the energy was lesser. And where the crests of one wave met the troughs of the other, the energy was neutralized. This is what created an interference pattern where you have a series of light and dark fringes. Now, to test matter at a molecular level, they then shot a mass of atoms at the two slits, and lo and behold, energy was recorded on the photosensitive screen did in fact demonstrate the same wave pattern. The scientists then took the experiment to another level by shooting only one atom at a time at the slits. What they expected to see was two strips of registered energy, as the single atoms would pass through either of the two slits, but there would not be a wave interference as they struck the screen. Now we get to the interesting part. Rather than seeing a pattern of two strips created by the atoms which passed through one or the other of the slits, what was recorded was actually the same wave pattern. Now this suggests that either the atoms passing through the slits were splitting and interfering with themselves, or the trajectory of the atoms pre-existed as a range of possible outcomes, which in effect registered as a wave rather than as individual particles. Now, hold on to your seats as we go from the interesting to the mind-blowing and finally get to my point. To better understand the phenomenon, the scientists then added a device, which they poetically called the which-way machine, to observe and measure how many atoms passed through each of the two slits. Having done this, something truly remarkable happened. Simply by observing the atoms through the which-way machine, the waves collapsed, and the particles registered on the screen exactly as they had originally predicted, as individual particles with a specific trajectory. The only variable between the two experiments was the introduction of observation and measurement with the which-way machine. When unobserved, the atoms behaved like a wave of possibility, and when observed, they acted like fixed particles on a specific trajectory. Observing and measuring actually changed the future. Now, taking this discovery back to our now in the wonder bread of the cosmos, my personal theology instructs me to transform my future from the waves of possibility to a specific trajectory by observing and taking measure of myself. I observe and take measure of the needs of my family, of my friends, of my community, of my clients, and my country. With an objective eye, I observe and take measure of my white privilege. With love in my heart, I observe and take measures of the struggles of my black and brown brothers and sisters. With compassion and an open mind, I observe and take measure of those whose politics do not align with my own. And with optimism and hope, I observe and take measure of my environment. I do not allow anger, remorse, or regret of the past to ride as waves through my now to create an uncertain future of fear, doubt, or despair. I live in the now, where I observe, measure, and create the trajectory of my future. In my future, our alien friend Bob, as he bicycles back towards us light years away, may very well see my great-great-grandchildren enjoying their filtered urine and potato soup on Mars, but they will be there by choice, not by necessity. While back on Earth, Bob would be welcomed to a green, lush, and vibrant planet inhabited by a single community of brothers and sisters, observing and taking measure of themselves, their society, and their planet.
Thank you, Brian and Kathleen and Don and Rod, for all of our music today. And Brian, it is just such a pleasure to see either your hands gliding over the keys for the gentle music or you dancing along, and you dancing along when you feel like it too. Thank you for the music you bring to our services. All right. One of the things that I love hearing is not only folks' stories of how they found Unitarian Universalism, but also their stories of any other religious traditions and communities in their past and what drew them here. We all come from so many different paths to get here, and that includes folks who have been Unitarian or Universalist or Unitarian Universalist for their whole lives. We have folks here who have. Their stories are often quite fascinating too. Our paths can be quite interesting and certainly make up a significant part of ourselves. One way we can think about these is as part of what we might call our spiritual autobiographies, as some of the overall brushstrokes that make up our spiritual journeys. However, I've often thought about my own journey as more a rather wild patchwork quilt than good defined brushstrokes, though. To start with my journey, though, I have to go back a couple of generations. My grandmother and great-aunt were raised Jewish, but publicly converted to Catholicism because of the anti-Semitism they faced at the time. And this wasn't anti-Semitism in Europe. This was anti-Semitism in Michigan. They both remained Catholic for the rest of their lives, and my mom was raised Catholic. However, she didn't like the prescribed rituals and didn't feel a huge attachment to the religion, so she began switching around to find what might feel like a better fit for her. The first church I remember was an American Baptist one when we lived in the Midwest. As a child, I remember participating in a program called Awana. Some days I wonder if it's still around, where we had a vest with badges on it and a little plastic crown where we could earn little plastic jewels that could be glued to the crown, and how I went through the workbook to see what pieces are necessary to get my next jewel. We earned badges and jewels for Bible verses memorized and the like. And I was good at memorizing verses and passages, so I had my crowns all filled up by the end of the year. And next, I remember a tiny storefront church that simply had the designation as non-denominational. Now, if you don't know, that's usually code for Pentecostal. Now, no snakes or anything in the one we went to, but extremely conservative theology. Now, from there, my mom took the family to a large Southern Baptist church and then another large Southern Baptist church where I spent the rest of my childhood. Except for the theology and the onerous rules, I liked it there. The people were nice. We had great youth trips and a youth group of more than 100 folks. And I got to teach in vacation Bible school and play in the orchestra. I guess for me it was more about doing things than about the teachings. Well, combine that with my Church of Christ school, and that's not UCC. Instead, it was the much more conservative variety. And I was really ready to start asking questions as soon as I had the opportunity to do so. Enter religious studies professors and academic study of the Bible and religious history, and the next phase of my journey was started. I can't say I was building my own beliefs yet. It was more that I had to unbuild things first. And have y'all been there? Over the next few years, my beliefs and the grounding for my beliefs and a lot of my other social views were shattered into a pile of rubble and dust. Now, I don't actually mind that. It actually felt quite empowering, but it did leave me a bit empty in the process. At that point, I knew what I wasn't, but I really didn't know what I was yet. And I wonder how much that describes many UUs currently, knowing what we aren't, but still each figuring out a bit of what we are. And thus began the standard young adult wandering stage. I tried out Unitarian Universalism, Zen Buddhism, general paganism, then a specific school of Wicca, then back to Unitarian Universalism. While at the same time, my mother meandered back to Reform Judaism. Like I said, a crazy patchwork quilt. Now, there are a couple of terms that it's helpful to know in UU-type circles. There are the come-inners, and there are the born-inners. They mean what you might think they mean from how they sound. The born-inners are folks that are born into Unitarian Universalism, or Unitarianism, and the come-inners started out elsewhere and came into Unitarian Universalism. They may have come from either another religious tradition or without a religious background of any sort. Come-inners and born-inners. I'm a come-inner, as are most Unitarian Universalists today, something like maybe 85% of us. When I entered my first Unitarian Universalist congregation in Nashville, Tennessee, I remember one of the things that was most exciting to me was discovering the openness about beliefs and the fact that there weren't any prescribed beliefs that I had to go and say. Instead, we were welcomed and encouraged to seek out our own truths and our own answers. I had never heard of anything like that, especially in my heavily Southern Baptist background that I just shared with you. I had never found not only permission, but encouragement to seek out my own answers. Even the religious studies professors had answers they supplied to us about what historical contexts meant and what phrases translated to what and such. They were still answers. The idea of getting to seek out my own meaning was like a river of refreshing, life-giving water. To this day, I still believe this is one of the hallmarks of our tradition, the encouragement to seek out our own paths and our own meanings and truths. Both our third and fourth principles point to it. These are principles that our congregations collectively agree to affirm and promote. The third principle encourages the acceptance of one another and encouragement to spiritual growth in our congregations. And the fourth, a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. So you hear that right there in our core principles, which, by the way, principles, not beliefs. These are just guiding principles for how we are together and how we hold each other when we are together. Right there in our core principles is this openness and encouragement for each of us to search, and to search for our own meaning. Now, this is really cool, by the way. I believe it's one of the truly unique things about Unitarian Universalism, and one of the unique ways that we welcome folks just as they are. This welcoming's been around for longer than just these modern times, too. And if you're wondering why I keep saying Unitarian or Universalist or Unitarian Universalist, it was 1961 when the Unitarians and the Universalists came together to form the Unitarian Universalist Association. So the Unitarian historian and theologian Earl Morris Wilbur wrote about, many things. He had an enormous 3-volume brick of a work on Unitarian history. The most quoted thing he wrote was about the 3 core values, or the 3 core pillars of Unitarianism. At that time, in the early 20th century, so, just about 100 years ago, the 3 pillars he named were freedom, reason, and tolerance. Now, these 3, freedom, reason, and tolerance, certainly support our openness for each individual's own spiritual discernment. First, freedom, the freedom to seek out our own answers and come to our own conclusions. Reason, encouragement to use reason as one of our guiding lights in that search. And last, tolerance, the acceptance of the searches of other folks. Freedom, reason, and tolerance. I admit I can't really talk about these 3 without also wondering what they would look like, and should, if I can should on us for a moment, what they should look like today. I mean, they still ring true to a degree, but I wonder what our current 3 pillars or our current 3 values as Unitarian Universalists would be now. Certainly a step further than tolerance, since I hope we do far more than just tolerate our differences. But that's a sermon for another day, but that would be a curious place to go. What are our 3 core pillars now? Ideally, in our congregations, it's not just naming a few beliefs and then merely going on our way. Instead, what we're really doing is encouraging folks towards a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. Now, that's a good bit to unpack. So let's start. A free search, a responsible search, and a search for truth and meaning. So starting with free, back to Wilbur's 3 pillars, freedom is one of them. And the idea of a free search is what really enamored me when I first found our tradition. It was the freedom of it, without prescribed anythings that I had to accommodate in that search. It felt free, and it felt freeing as well. I'm wondering how many folks here were drawn to that feeling of freedom, too. I've certainly heard in the spiritual stories of many folks how important that particular element is to them, a free search. The next part, a responsible search. This one's, a little trickier, a little harder to find, because there's the big question of to whom or to what are we responsible? In many other religious traditions, the question of accountability is, a bit easier. With overall deistic beliefs in many, and with some, a particular power structure for their clergy and priests and rabbis, accountability is fairly evident. One answers to God or to the covenant with God, or to your parish priest or another priest or bishop or the like. For UUs, the accountability is more difficult and relies on our consciences and on our relationships with each other. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, and I admit that I like it a lot better. But I'm also a geek for relationships and the power for what they can do for us. Then the last part is that we encourage a search for truth and meaning. Now, these last 2 parts, the responsible and accountable search and the search for truth and meaning, are what we tap into in classic UU curricula, like the one called Building Your Own Theology, which is why I named this sermon that. In that class, we aren't just naming a few things, but rather systematically starting with each of our spiritual journeys and compelling questions, and then going through several aspects of what would make up our personal theology, and then sharing that construction as a group. And upcoming this spring, I'll be leading a spiritual autobiography class, which is an expanded version of one of the classic exercises in building your own theology, when we go back and think through our own spiritual timelines and kind of how they are making each of us up today. Finding and sharing each of our own beliefs is a core part of Unitarian Universalism. It's lifelong work, too, as we find and refine our own statements, as we come upon things that challenge our beliefs and maybe open us up to thinking a different way and opening to that. It doesn't mean all of these are changing, although for some folks they might be. But we are coming up with ever new and better questions and those things we call learning experiences or growth opportunities. Often there are extra words on that, but I'll stick with that from here today. Had any of those lately? It's about keeping our answers under construction. Now, there's another thing that I wonder about and I worry about, because I'm a worrywart. I worry about making sure that what we're talking about and encouraging is meeting the needs of a particular variety of folks. I wonder that we're meeting both the needs of folks who are new here, as well as the folks who've been UUs for a while, if not a good while, if not their entire lives. In these theology classes, we've got newer folks and folks who are longer time UUs, but it isn't just about that particular context. I wonder about this with regards to much that we do. And I'm not alone in wondering and worrying about this. In our denomination's Commission on Appraisal report, Engaging Our Theological Diversity, the team exploring various aspects of that issue commented that, quote, "In general, UU congregations do much better at meeting the needs of relative newcomers than those of our longtime members. We often aim much of our educational programming at newer folks, whether they're folks newer to our theology and ways of thinking, or folks who are newer even to our justice issues. And then I often struggle to find the equivalent of the 201 and 301 versions. And I admit I've been part of this problem for years too. It's one of the ways that our congregations in general are calibrated. And it's great that we're calibrated that way. That's part of our inclusive theological welcoming. But I do also worry. I ask how best can we be supporting and encouraging the spiritual journeys and spiritual growth of all of our members and of all of the folks here. Now, I can come up with lots of answers to that question. I bet we all can. At least of answers that seem to make sense for us. But I don't want to jump to answering the question too quickly because I think it is a very complicated and complex question. We are a theologically complex place, and leaning into that complexity means we'll have answers that are complex too. Those three pillars, freedom, reason, and tolerance. What would these pillars be for our newest folks? What would they be for folks who've been UUs for maybe 10 years, 20 years, 40 years? What about folks who've been UUs since their birth? What about for our younger folks, our elders, our LGBT folks, our members and our friends of color, or folks with so many other perspectives and identities? We've built this great big tent, and we work hard to make space for as many folks as possible here. That is one of the modern interpretations of our universalism, that big tent that welcomes and loves and accepts everyone. How can we not only welcome everyone, but also encourage everyone and push and challenge everyone? It's not just about feeling good, although, that's nice. It's about growing. It's about becoming better people, about nudging each other towards that too. This is our challenge, and I hope it's our calling too. May it be so.
As we commit together to making this lifelong community, we take the time to remember that UUCB needs our gifts and support. We invite you now to make an offering, and as you know, each week, half of our offering is shared with a local organization that needs our financial support. We're grateful you're continuing to practice generosity towards our good neighbors during this prolonged, difficult time. This month, our Good Neighbor organization is the Read Aloud volunteer program. Read Aloud is a nonprofit that matches trained volunteers with students in Richmond and San Pablo elementary schools to read one-on-one weekly throughout the school year. Each site maintains its own library of core books to read and a separate library from which students can choose a gift book, twice a month to keep. UUCB members volunteer regularly with Read Aloud. Offerings of any value are received with gratitude. Details on how to give electronically will appear on your screen as our offertory begins. Thank you. Please join me in dedicating our offering. We dedicate our offering and ourselves to the mission of this congregation, to create a loving community, inspire spiritual growth, and encourage lives of integrity, joy, and service.
I almost forgot about the announcements. We can't forget about those. It has been so good being together today, even as we are together virtually. Before we shift to any of our after the service activities, I remind you to check out all of the things available in our congregation, check out the week ahead email, our website, talk to other people. We got lots going on. But I got some stuff to remind you of, including after the service today, online on Zoom, is our candidates forum, when you get to hear from and all of our candidates for our Board of Trustees. But wait, when are they being elected? We have our congregational meeting coming up Sunday, February 13th after the service. So come to the forum today, hear from our candidates, and then plan to come to our congregational meeting on the 13th as well. And no, you can't complain that it's Valentine's Day because it's the day before Valentine's Day, so you should be able to make it. And as we talked about relationships and encouraging each other on our spiritual journeys today, I encourage you to check out our chalice circles, and which are our signature small groups here. There are new groups starting up in February. Granted, they're filling up quickly, so be sure to sign up soon. They're a really great way to both be encouraged and encourage each other on our own spiritual journeys. All right, now, how about a closing song? Our closing song is Spirit of Truth. The words will be on screen. Let's join in singing.
Spirit of truth, of life and power, we bring ourselves as gifts to Thee. O bind our hearts this sacred hour in faith and hope and charity.
We'll close today with the words of Sarah Morse Campbell. We receive fragments of holiness, glimpses of eternity, brief moments of insight. Let us gather them up for the precious gifts they are and, renewed by their grace, move boldly into the unknown. And now from this time of worship, may you go with hope, with connection, with peace, with courage, and maybe with some questions that you're going to chase this week. And remember, you're never all alone. Blessed be.